Welcome to Herf Zone Live, the show that is unlike any other cigar show, where we have the most eclectic lineup of guests, of which some smoke cigars and some who don't. Either way, we bring you the best content weekly. Herf Zone Live is sponsored by StogieLives.com. If you're looking for an alternative to other social medias that's very friendly to cigar smokers, unlike some of the other social media platforms, then you definitely got to check out StogieLives.com. Tell them Shirtless Mike sent you and all that good stuff. And I'm on there, and it's awesome. It's an awesome platform, something different, and all that. So, wow, I hope everybody out there has had a good day. I see some people finally starting to join. So if you're already watching, make sure you say what's up in the comments and all that good stuff. We have a great show lined up tonight. It's been a long day, a slow but steady Tuesday. So having this show, that's the highlight of the day always. So tonight I'm gonna be smoking the La Aroma de Cuba. I'm gonna smoke. I believe this is the Robusto size. Hopefully got this correct. I know my sizes, but it's been a long day, like I said. So without further ado, man, tonight's guest is Antoine Reid. He's the how do I say this? The senior editor in online content person for Tobacco Business Magazine. I I need notes because I was fucking up everything, but it's all good. Uh, so waiting patiently in a Cigar Hustlers podcast green room, we have Mr. Antoine Reid from Tobacco Business and Deep Cuts Live. Yeah, I don't butchered your title, man. Sorry
Oh,
about that.
fine. Sometimes I forget what it is. I'm like, it's like writer, it's like senior editor and director of digital content or something to that effect. So it's close enough.
Yeah, I mean, I told people what you do and all that good stuff. They know you're a writer, what you do, and everything. So yeah, man. We were talking before the show and all that. I caught Deep Cuts live today, and it was definitely a good show, man. I follow Sisters in Smoke and everything, and I mean, it was some pretty good stuff there. Like, you don't seem to talk a lot. That's kind of why I wanted to get you on the show because, you're the interviewer. You
Yeah.
let yeah, you're not a big talker, but that's what I specialize in. I talk a lot, and I like to get people to talk as well. So
Well,
yeah,
sometimes when I listen back to the episodes and the interviews I do, I'm like, oh my gosh, I talk I look at the timestamp and I'm like, I went on for like 2 or 3 minutes on something I could have probably just said in like half that time. So I always try to scale back a little bit to give the guest a little bit more time to uh to talk and to answer the question. So that's the only reason why you don't really see me talk much on the interview.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I'm kind of the same way, but although you know, I. I think you've experienced this. It's like a metamorphosis. Like, you start off one way, but then you just get more comfortable with it in your own skin as an interviewer, because you primarily started in the digital content, print type stuff, and then being face to face on video and doing the prep and everything is it's a whole lot different. So I've kind of learned to, yeah, you let your guests talk, but if there's something you want to chime in on, it's good to, kind of just have that natural flow of conversation.
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, we're gonna just get started with the interview. I know you're not smoking tonight because you can't smoke in your apartment.
That's right.
Um, I mean, you got more cigars than me, definitely. I'm a smoker. I don't collect cigars, but since your smoking has to be limited in a way. But we'll let you pass because you're hurting in the heart. So
Thank
yeah.
you.
So tonight, as you already know, I'm smoking a La Remedy Cuba here. Believe it's the Robusto size. I get confused because sometimes there's several different sizes. I just like the original La Roma de Cuba. I don't care what size it's in. But so yeah, we'll get started here. So tell me a little about your early life and where did you grow up? How was your childhood? Just give us the intro on Antoine Reid here.
Well, I grew up in the same city where I live now, which is Durham, North Carolina, in the South, as you can probably tell from my accent. Uh, Growing up, I was really into the arts, so drawing and uh, coloring, making little comic books. I went to an art magnet school, So I did basically what you saw on Fame is kind of what my middle school years into high school was like. You had to. I did the painting, did clay, did, like I said, drawing, and then I also did choir for many years of that, and that just opened me up to a whole bunch of different experiences. And then once I graduated from high school, I was kind of tired of art, and I didn't think that I could ever find a career that would pay. And I didn't want to be one of those people who went, to art school and basically didn't have much options in terms of careers afterwards. So I thought I was going to get into psychology, and then I found out how much science and math was involved in that. So that didn't work out because those are not my forte. So when I transferred from the University of Miami to the University of Chapel Hill, or University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I remember I spoke to my advisor, and she asked me what did I want to major in. I told her I had no idea at this point, because I thought, like, my whole mentality was going to be psychology, 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 and it just didn't work out. And she asked me what did I like to do, and I kind of gave her the spiel I just gave you. And she said, maybe you should get into the journalism school then. And she's like, because you could be a graphic designer. And I had never heard of graphic design at that point, and told her maybe. And she was like, there's two different tracks you could take. You can go to the art school and do graphic design, or you can go to the journalism school. And she's like, and I think based on what you said, if you went to the journalism school, then at least you will have more options. You won't have to worry about, because you'll have to go through the journalism track just like everybody else. You have to learn how to do reporting and take a political science stuff and the law stuff. And I was like, that sounds like a lot of work, but I was like, yeah, I could do that. And that's what I did. And then getting out of college, I was a graphic designer for many years. And then it switched over about 2015 when I started doing some editorial stuff. And now I do like a little mix of everything. It depends on what time of the day, because there's some days when I have to be like a little web designer, put together stories for websites, and there's others where I need to just do a lot of writing. So now that's kind of long story short of how I got to where I am now.
Mm, most definitely. You kind of jumped ahead a little bit. We're gonna get to every little detail here, but so just coming up in school, because like I said, you jumped way ahead, but we could get deeper on there. So coming up in school, did you have any favorite subjects that you really got with little effort, or did was school like more of a struggle for you?
Oh no, I liked you know I liked history for the most part. There are some years where each year in school you kind of focus on a different part of history. So like the civics and stuff like that was not really my forte. Um, and depending on what teacher, I may or may not have liked history that year. But I actually liked history enough where I actually picked it up a little bit more when I got into college, and I had a concentration in history, which just meant I was a couple courses away from it being like a minor or something like that. Um, I did really good in algebra for some reason, but that was like the only like math year. Like geometry was not my thing. I I just things kind of stopped after algebra somehow, so I managed to miss the whole calculus bit because I was just like, that's just not my thing. So anything math related was not me, and I always knew I was like, I can never do anything like that was going to be math related. And then iPhones and everything else were invented. So now I walk around with a calculator, which is awesome because now all
Yeah,
that math that I was worried about
yeah,
easily calculate. So there's just like usually with my job now, it's really minor math that I need to know, like how to average things, how to, the simple stuff that's easy stuff. But luckily, I
yeah,
don't do anything that requires calculus or
yeah.
geometry or anything of that sort. So I always did well in those subjects, and then of course anything art related, I just excelled at, like art and the choir years. I really did really good in. Those are like easy for me.
Most definitely. Yeah, my job too. I don't use math. Like, well, I do, because but it's stuff that's, it's basic stuff like you got to know how to count money. You got
Right.
when I'm pricing stuff.
Oh yeah,
He
I'm good at counting money. Like that's
yeah, I
like
mean that's
that
no
kind
issue right there.
that kind of math. I'm like ching 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 ching. Okay, you have this much here. Like I can do that with ease. But algebra, I mean, like advanced algebra and calculus and stuff like that was like not my. It wasn't my thing.
Yeah. Now let's talk more about, just the University of Miami. You went there for, like 1 year. So like what was that experience like for you? And you talked about, kind of, getting into journalism and then so just focus on Miami and then we'll get into North Carolina where you got more into journalism and everything. Like what
I don't even know if I've spoken about Miami that much on podcasts because it was like the worst. It was the worst experience of my college years. Um, it was the first time like I had the weirdest roommates, and it just made the whole experience like terrible. Um, I remember the first roommate just liked to party all the time, and I wasn't a big partier, so I remember. I mean, he would come in and I mean, he was trying to like be in the frats and all this stuff and hang out with girls all the time. And I was just like a nerdy bookworm type person. And I remember being like in my bed. I was a very light sleeper. So the moment he came in, I was like, oh God, he's back. I just remember him and this girl falling on me in my bed. And I just remember at that point, that next day, I remember I woke up and I was like, you know what? I was like, I have to get out of this room situation with you because you're making me physically ill. And so I'm going to have to find a new roommate. And and then I was dumb at that time and I let him help me find a roommate. So he found me somebody even worse than him, who was this guy from Montana who apparently they don't have any diversity in Montana, or at least they didn't at the time. So he was really fascinated with like any like because we have like black football players that live next to us or something like that. So he was always fascinated with whole black culture, and he would say things like they would entertain him and I wouldn't because I was just focused on what I need to get done. And he would go to them and say, I want to know how to say this in Ebonics so I can communicate with your people. And they would laugh about it and think it was funny. And I was like, oh my gosh, like the whole time. And he would take my stuff. He would take my bowls that I had to eat out of, and he would trying to return them, and they would be like crusted over with stuff. And I would be like, just keep it, dude. It's yours. Like I would come in, he would take my socks, and I was like, where are my socks at? Like he'll be wearing them. I was like, just keep them. I don't want them anymore.
you don't know what he's doing with them.
Right. And then it was like taking my sunglasses. He's like, oh, I have a modeling gig. Can I wear these? And I was like, just do whatever you want. So it was a terrible experience. And he would go missing for like days, and I would never know where he was, and I didn't care. Those would be like the best days because I would be in the room and I wouldn't have to go anywhere. It was just a weird experience. I won't share all of what that was like on here because it's not appropriate probably for like a mass audience of sorts. But just think of the worst situation you could possibly be in, and that was that, and that made me transfer from Miami to UNC Chapel Hill, and then I went through like my first year there. I had an okay roommate up until the end, and things got weird, and then I had that next year I said I'm going to do. They were publicizing at the time like substance-free housing, which was basically you had to take a pledge not to drink. And I was like, hey, I could do that. That's like easy. I was like, I should end up with the most boring people, nerdy people possible. I should get along with these people. And somehow I ended up with the room with the one person who drank all the time. And, you had those little teeny tiny college freezers or refrigerators that were like, could only have like one shelf in it and like one little thing in the freezer. And he would just occupy it all. It was mine, but he would like fill it up with beer and stuff. And nobody believed me at the time. Like I would go to the RA and was like, look, he's like drinking. And they're like, no, he's not. He's like the best guy ever. And I was like, no, like he seriously is. And they just didn't believe me. And so that's when I started getting to the journalism school. So I started to keep a blog at that time. And I would write every day. Like if he made me mad, since nobody was listening to me, I would like put it in the blog. And I was like, sit there, type it up and stuff. He would stay up like at 3 o'clock in the morning talking because he would, like, when I was in class, he would be sleeping. So when I was trying to sleep, he would be, up and doing stuff. It was just a terrible situation. And I remember I wrote this blog, and I got called to like the housing authorities office one day, and they, sat me down and they plopped this big stack of paper down in front of me. They was like, "This is your blog, and like you made your roommate cry and all this stuff." I was like, "What?" I was like, "This is like the most ridiculous things." So I always found myself in these weird situations that, that was my college years. And then in between all that drama, I was like trying to learn and get an education. And then I got out of school, and I just realized that you really didn't learn much in those classes. Like it didn't really prepare you for like the real world. It was just like those experiences, having to deal with crazy people, was to me like the whole college experience. I was like, oh yeah, like then you have to deal with those people in real life as an adult, and so that was my college experience.
Awesome. Now, here's the $1 million question. How long have you been smoking cigars, and what led to your interest in smoking cigars?
Well, obviously, people who watch Deep Cuts and they see me on Instagram, they know I have a completely different relationship with cigars than most people. So cigars for me are like a curiosity, because as I was starting to write more about cigars, I was like, I should probably know a little bit more about what I'm writing about. So for me, like, I don't smoke that. Like, I've yet to have like a moment where I'm like, oh, I need a cigar or whatever just to relax or something like that. It's usually like, oh, I'm going to write a story on this person or this company, or I read something interesting about this person. I want to be able to know what I'm talking about. And that makes me gravitate towards trying out one of their cigars. So I didn't really start. So I came into the industry on the media side in 2010, and I don't think I had my first cigar until like 2015.
Mm. So you didn't even start smoking until 2015. You were in the media side of things. It's not. So it was just more so the curiosity then for you.
Yeah, because then, like I said, by 2015 is when I started to work with Cigars and Leisure, and
Yeah.
so we were working with more companies. And as a graphic designer, I found I really didn't need to smoke cigars, or I just needed to put together the story in an attractive way. So that was my focus during, from 9 to 5 most days. And then as you're speaking to people, when you go to interview somebody and they're talking about the cigar that they spent, you know, 3 or 4 years developing, then you're like, I kind of need to know what that cigar is like, and not to come up with questions, but just to kind of be. That's how you can put yourself in that experience. So, as I start dealing with more stories, like writing about EP Carrillo and Davidoff and Drew Estate stuff, and then I was like, I guess I should try some of their, actually try some of their cigars to figure out, to know what I'm talking about.
Mm. Yeah, your story of how you got into cigars was probably like the most unique out of anybody that I've ever talked to. Like it's I mean it's different because all obviously you are a cigar smoker, but you may not be the everyday guy or whatever that smokes every single day,
Yeah.
but it's very interesting. I always like to hear people's origin stories on how they got into it and everything. But you're in the industry like me, you get access to, smoke whatever you want. What are some of your favorite cigars to smoke? And are there any that you go to more often than others?
You know what? Funny enough, as I rarely find myself repeating cigars, probably because I am in the media side. And like if I go to TPE or if I go to PCA, I come back with cigars. And then throughout the year, every now and then, a company might send me cigars to try. And so I feel like I live in a cigar shop right now, where it's like, what do I feel like smoking today? If I have felt that need, I would probably have something comparable to it here somewhere. So there are brands that I like, but they're for completely different reasons usually. Like I like Room 101 because I got to know Matt Booth over the years, and I know that his mindset of creating a cigar is completely different from one of the big four, or the next guy. So I like to try his stuff just to kind of see what he came up with in that flavor profile. Caldwell is another one of those people. Again, he has such a unique personality that you just want to try whatever he's worked on because you know it's going to be pretty well thought out. But I mean, I will say I've yet to come across a cigar that makes you go like, I really don't want to try this ever again. I might come across a cigar that's like, yeah, that's nice, and I don't feel like I don't need to try it, like necessarily try it again, but it doesn't stop me from going through the rest of their portfolio, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it seems like what you like, you know, is the disruptors, Matt Booth, Caldwell, because you like to smoke cigars from the disruptors, Drew Estate, the original disruptor in the cigar industry and all that. Have you smoked any Privada Cigar Club LCA cigars?
I have not. I think I've bought maybe one or two of those in the last year or two, but they're in my like ever growing stack of things to get around to. But I haven't like gotten around to their stuff yet.
Yeah, like I'm not, I sell the shop I work at as an LCA shop, and so I smoke them more so because I'm not like a huge person that likes the limited edition stuff. I like stuff that I know is always available, and I don't chase cigars. Like that's why I love La Roma de Cuba because it's always going to be consistent. They make a great product, through Ashton and everything, and it's under the Ashton umbrella. But I gotta say, like the LCA Privada Cigar Club cigars are kind of a hit or miss at times, but when they're good, they're like really good.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just a matter of, it's all about personal preference, first of all, but it's also like a matter of, just discovering, just smoking it to see for yourself. Um, but sometimes I've smoked a few, which I'm not going to mention any of the particular cigar where I was just like, why? Because I have to pay full price for it unless they don't sell that well. Then, after like a couple weeks, that I could, use my employee discount. So, I definitely, I spend that $11, $12, and it's always an interesting experience. Like from you, as a media side, I know you interviewed Brian Descend and everything. So definitely got to get in and try some more. It's a unique experience to say the least.
Yeah.
So let's see here. So let's talk about here. You initially got into the cigar industry. You're doing graphic design. You were working with Cigar Leisure magazine. How did you get hooked up, with them to get your official start? And then we'll get into your current position.
Okay.
Um, so yeah.
Well, I used to work for a gardening magazine for 4.5 years. It did not pay well. I did not know it didn't pay well. It was my first job out of college and my first real job ever. So I thought it paid well until I realized it didn't, which didn't really matter. By the time I kind of came across that conclusion, the magazine had been bought out, and obviously there was a lot of overlap. They were based in Louisiana, and so they kind of got rid of all of our staff. And so when it came time for me to get the boot, I was happy because I was ready for a change. And later on in that year, I came across a job listing on, I think, Craigslist at the time, and this company was looking for a graphic designer, and I was like, I can do that. And I had gone through so many job interviews. This was 2010. I just didn't care anymore, and I was just like, whatever. I was like, it doesn't even matter. So I walked in there kind of nonchalant and like laid back because I was just like, I've been through so many of these job interviews, and I just don't care anymore. I just want to get a job at some point. And I had another interview set up that next day with a completely different company. So I was just like, if this doesn't work out, that's fine. And I went through the interview process, and they asked me questions like, like, what happens if you don't have a picture? And I was like, I guess I'll just make a picture. I'll go out and take a picture myself or something crazy like that. And they literally like that, like attitude, like they're like, nothing seems to phase you. And I was like, at this point, it doesn't. I've been through it all. So it wasn't until like I got home from that interview and I didn't know. I was like, maybe it worked out. I don't know. and they were calling me back and they said, we want to make you an offer. Can you come back in tomorrow? And I was like, okay. And I came back in, and that's when they told me, like, most of our magazines are tobacco based. Is that okay with you? And I was like, are you gonna have a problem with that? I was like, as long as y'all don't force me to, like, use the product if I don't want to use it. I was like, I don't care what it is. I was like, I'll, a graphic. I mean, it's not gonna be my name on it, really. I was like, so if I, as long as you're okay with me not being a tobacco user, and they're like, that's fine. And so that's how I got the Spectcom job. So that's when I worked with tobacconists, Pipes and Tobaccos magazine, Tobacco Reporter, Vapor Voice, and then later on down the road, me and somebody else created Cigars and Leisure because there's a need for advertising, and there none of the magazines that we had, believe it or not, were like set up to take advertising from cigar lounges. So Cigars and Leisure was supposed to be like the cigar lounge magazine, kind of for consumers, because everything that we did at Spectcom was B2B based.
Yeah.
And we created Cigars and Leisure completely in the background. And by the time we presented it to Spectcom, it was done. I mean, the design was done because I worked on the design because I was a graphic designer. We created like a mock magazine that the salesperson at the time had carried around with him to different companies, secured some advertising saying like, hey, if we get this thing going, would you advertise in it? And they were like, yeah, it seems cool, whatever. So it had the advertising set up. So it was like, for Spectcom, it was like, all they had to do was say like yes or no, like, do you want to do it or not? So it was just like, it was like a no-brainer for them. It was like free money. So they were like, yeah, like, well, like, yeah, I guess we'll do it. So we did that for a couple of years until, no, maybe it wasn't a couple of years. It was like maybe like a year and a half. And then that's when we got approached to like, hey, we hit, like, Cretech had this magazine called Tobacco Business. And they were like, we want this magazine to be a competitor to, tobacconists and really do some stuff. And they're like, maybe you all are you and, the person who, other person who created Cigars and Leisure, and like could be fit for that. And so he came on as a managing director, and they didn't even have a place for me at first. So they were like, what do you do? And I was like, well, I write. And they were like, well, we got writers, so we don't really need a writer. And I was like, oh. And so they created a job for me being a digital director or something like that. And that's how I became that person who dealt with the website, dealt with the email marketing, the social media and stuff like that. And then eventually I got back around to doing writing. So that's the long story short about how that whole arc of going from graphic designer to writer kind of came about for me.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely cool to see the backstory. So you were one of the. I didn't even know that you were one of the creators of Cigars and Leisure. So that's awesome. And even with my research,
It's not out there a lot.
yeah. So the way it's put out there is, it's like you work for them, versus you're one of the creators over there. So that's pretty awesome there. So um those of us in the industry, we know that tobacco business is in charge of the Tobacco Plus Expo and everything. And for those who may not be aware, give us a history of TPE, and also, do you have any sort of role in the planning of TPE, or is that out of your scope on things? You just kind of stick to the magazine and the online aspect of things.
Well, my main focus is typically the magazine. I do sometimes help with the education part of TPE. I have for like the past couple of years. So all the educational sessions, because of the pandemic, they've been virtual for like the past 2 years. So I do that part. TPE is part of Tobacco Media Group. The parent company of Tobacco Media Group is Cretech International, who also owns Phillips and Kings. So TPE has been around for years, like decades, and it's evolved. It's the trade show that has evolved with the industry. So it used to be two separate shows. There used to be kind of a one that was heavily vapor, and then as things kind of changed, of course, with regulations and and e-cigarettes kind of went through their own transformation. Then it kind of got combined with kind of like the I don't know if you remember it, but there used to be like a NATO show. Um,
I've heard of it. Yeah.
yeah, and NATO was kind of like other tobacco products, or kind of a big broad span of tobacco products like cigarettes and machine made cigars and snus and pipe tobacco and everything else in between. So it kind of got merged with that, so that you have two trade shows going on in one. And now it's still that, but now within that tobacco section is a big premium cigar focus, in addition to all the other tobacco products. So, um, these days, like I said, I kind of focus on more on the education stuff, and helping to keep the magazine up and going. But that's kind of how TPE and tobacco business kind of, they're part of the same company. Obviously, we use the magazine to try to promote all those different companies that take part in it, support TPE.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Now let's talk about a little bit of your process as a writer, from start to finish. How long does it typically take you to write an article from the research phase to the finish aspect? We all got our different routines and everything. So is it a long process for you, so on and so forth?
It depends on what I'm writing for. So if I'm writing for just an article on the website, obviously that's going to be 1 or 2 hours, maybe, even if it's just 300 or so words, because every now and then a story will come out and there might be only be one source for that story, and I have to try to figure out, if this, like, what's the source of their, what source of information did this other website or blog use to create that story. And sometimes that's what takes a long time, because if I can't find it, then I'm like, I'm probably not going to run that story, because sometimes it's like a loaded story. Like, it'll be something crazy about like regulations, or something happened with this company, and like I said, I have to find a source to back it up. So if somebody ever comes to me and say like, well, "Why did you all run the story?" I can say,
Yeah.
"Well, it came from here." So that's that kind of story. And then, like, for the magazine, it's a process. It could take, you know anywhere from 2 weeks to a month to get a story. Because it's usually about 1,500 to 2,000. Sometimes, if it's the cover story, 3,000 words, which is a lot. And then
Yeah.
usually I do the interview over the phone with people. And so I'm asking them questions, and I try not to listen too hard to it, because then I have to play back the whole interview and transcribe it, and to
Yeah.
try to get their words down as, like, as detailed as possible. So I don't like to do like fluff, like, well, maybe they kind of said this. Like, I like to get it exactly down to what they say, because I found that if you do it the other way, then there's like, I didn't say that. That's not what I meant. And then you're like, oh, so it takes a while to do that. And then once you have the transcript, which, like I said, depending on how long the interview was, like an hour interview could easily take you 1.5 days to transcribe. And that's if you're only doing that. So it might take me another 2 or 3 days to write that story. And then sometimes I have to send it to them for approval. So that's another a week or so. And then I'm writing another story while I wait for that to come back. And then it comes back to me all marked up. And so I have to look through the changes and see if everything's okay. And then send it to the copy editor, and then it has to be designed. So it's a process. It takes a while. And right now I'm the main writer for tobacco business. So it's almost as if I'm putting out a book six
Yeah.
six times a year, which is a lot. So, we just got done with our May June issue, and we're already starting on the July August issue within a span of like basically a day. So I've been reaching out to companies and trying to get things going. So it's definitely a process. It takes a lot longer, because I know most people only read about, because I can see the Google Analytics. They only read about a minute's worth of a story that should probably take about 5 or 6 minutes to read. But that story could easily take me a good, like I said, a couple weeks to put together from start to finish.
Most definitely. Yeah, my boss, he gets Tobacco Business Magazine, and when Amendola Cigars made the cover. I'm friends with Jeff Amendola and Chris Monaco, and I was trying to get like a physical copy from my boss. I was like, yo, like, because I know he doesn't even read the magazine, and I'm trying to send it to them so I can get an autograph and everything, and he's like, oh, I think I tossed it. Or I was like, bro. But I did catch the story online and everything, and it was an awesome testament. They've been guests on this show. Talk about some people who could talk. Them guys, they could talk.
Oh yeah.
Get them on a podcast. You know they could definitely talk. So let's see here. Since coming into the cigar industry, what has that experience been like? What solidifies things for you? Is it the people or just the general day to day working in cigar media? You started in one aspect, and I feel like you've grown to love it. So, like, what solidifies that for you, like, the most?
It's probably the interaction with people in general. Like when you hear somebody say that they actually read a story that took you a good month to write, that makes you feel pretty good. Um, it doesn't even matter like how, like if they say it was good or bad. They rarely say it's bad though, so you usually hear pretty good things. So for me, it's the interactions with the people. The process itself is, like I said, it's a little bit draining. It could take it could take a lot out of you. It's a full day, and you really have to kind of take breaks in the day just to kind of get your mind reset. Because it's a lot, and you have to switch over and just do so many different things and focus on so many different things coming at you and prepare for something that could be like weeks out. And you're doing like public relations basically. People are coming to you saying, hey, I got this story idea. You have to decide if it's a really good fit for the audience or not, and then if it's not, then how to politely say that that's probably not going to do what they think it's going to do for them and stuff like that, and finding a solution. So it's definitely the interactions with the people, because I feel like, especially over the last couple of years, that you hear a lot more about how the storytelling and getting the word out is important to people. So that part is kind of where I get my enjoyment from it at this point.
Awesome. Now, COVID gave birth to a lot of things, including, your podcast, Deep Cuts Live. How did you come up with the idea to start your own show? And tell us about how it evolved over time and what your vision is for Deep Cuts.
Well, it's like my personal side project. It's not really related to the magazine or
Yeah, of
anything
course.
that I do. For me, it was, the pandemic hit, what, March? I think it was March or so. And I had trips planned just like everybody else. I was supposed to be going to like Vegas to go to see how this other show did their education sessions, to see if I wanted to try to mimic any of that for TPE. And this came to an end. And then we saw all the other big cigar events for the year start getting canceled. And it was like, ooh, it's like, maybe this isn't, going to go away by Easter. Like, like we were thinking it was at first going to happen. And then it kind of just came into this whole thing. So I was like, so I'm going to be here for a while, especially with the lockdown stuff. And I was watching up what other people were doing. And I saw my friends, Amy and Erica from the Lounge Experience. They were interviewing people on Instagram Live, and I thought that was cool. And they asked me to be on their show, and I kind of, at first I was like, I'm a behind the scenes kind of person. I was like, I don't know if I really want to do it. And but I was, like I said, friends with them, so I was like, I'll give it a try. And I did, and it wasn't that bad. And it was just like this, they were asking me the questions, and I was answering it, and they were like, you should do it. You should do something on your own at some point. And I was like, yeah, maybe. I was like, and then I saw Michael Herklops doing it with lots of his friends and people that he had encountered. And I was like, that's kind of cool. And I was like, well, maybe I can try it. And so I reached out to Matt Booth, and I was like, look, I want to do this thing. I don't know if it's going to work or not. It's my first time ever doing like a live thing, interview, but would you be willing to do it? And he was like, yeah. And so it started with him. And then it just became this whole thing where it's just like catching on, and I was like doing other people, and I had no idea what it was going to be, because for me it was just like a exercise in speaking to people and having long form conversations with people, because I'm sure you know from going to trade shows and cigar events, sometimes like the people like Matt Booth are so busy that you only get 5 or 10 minutes with them, and
Yeah.
then you're like, we'll catch up later, and then you never catch up. And
Yeah.
so, and I was used to interviewing people over the phone, but that's so different because you're not sitting there looking at them. And so
Yeah.
it was like, how can I like use this time to become better at something? And I was like, the whole art of conversation and getting to know people and getting outside of my shell, I think is a good thing to kind of focus on. So that was what that first year of deep cuts was like. It was just like a long form experiment, and some of the interviews I got to do were like shocking because so many people were kind of stuck at home, or factories were closing down, and they were willing to be interviewed for the first time in like forever. Like
Yeah.
people that you would never even think about. I mean, it was like, and it will different interviews would lead to bigger interviews. It's like I remember I interviewed Joe Grow from Drew State, and then a couple of days later, I got David from EP Carrillo contacted me and was like, "Look, I just talked to Joe Grow, and I wanted to see if you were willing to interview Lisette or Ernesto." And I was like, you want me to interview like Lisette or Ernesto? I was like, yeah, if they want to come on. I mean, it was like Instagram Live, so I didn't think that I thought it would be a little bit beneath their stature to want to do something like that. And the same happened with like Rafael Nadal. It was like, hey, like it'd be cool if you could interview Rafael. So I was like, if he wants to be on, like, let's do it. And it was like such a weird time. Like that's why I was glad I was able to capture those videos and put them on YouTube, because I mean, it was like, here's like Rafael Nadal sitting at home, smoking a cigar, talking about migrating from Cuba. And then at the end, he's like, okay, I'm going to play you a song on the piano. I was like, cool. Let's
Who
like,
does that? Who does that?
right. It was like, cool. Like, okay. And it was like, interviewing Ernesto, and there's Ernesto, like #1 cigar of the year for a couple of years. So, sitting there in his living room, you know, people would come up in the Instagram lives like, Ernesto, blah, blah, blah. And he would just like sit there, like completely like, yeah, like answering the questions, like as if they were sitting right there. So that was like a really fun thing to like explore. And like, I remember I was able to pump out 52 episodes in 2020, which was like a lot. And then 2021 happened and things started opening back up. So then I kind of slowed down because when things started opening up, people were like, I'm out of here. I'm not doing Zoom. Like I'm not available. I'm going to travel again and stuff like that. So I kind of let people do their thing, and I wanted to kind of migrate off of Instagram Live because it was I was having issues with it. Like the audio would cut out in the middle of an interview and all this other weird stuff. And so like you, I
Yeah.
kind of went to StreamYard and I was like playing around with it. But it was like it wasn't a direct transfer of the show. It was like a whole new experience because it was
Yeah. It made it bigger and better, and you
yeah.
have a larger audience with it.
Yeah, and like you said, it's like, I was used to people watching live on Instagram Live. But then I realized too, it's like, how Instagram is. Like you might be sitting there watching something for a little bit. You're not watching for like an hour. Like, so you pop in, you pop out. So I never knew what those numbers were really. I never trusted the numbers because I was like, somebody could easily have just like pop in here for like a second and it'll be like, that's another view. That's another view. So like you, I kind of found like doing it the new way through StreamYard is like I tell people, I was like, don't pay attention to like the live count because people don't usually watch live. They watch like an hour after it's done or whenever they have time to. So it's kind of like creating like video content on demand, which is a completely different beast.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way. Like, it says there's 4 people watching right now, but like if you go back like over the next couple days, like people catch it, on their own. That's what I don't even worry about when we're live. It's just us talking because
Right.
some depending on the guests, we'll have more people on there. But like over the next few days, those numbers just they rise, and it's pretty cool because I used to make regular videos on my YouTube for like a little bit, but I was like, you know what, I want quality over quantity, so I just decided to just stick with my show and then make it exclusively on YouTube for right now, and then that way I can better track the numbers and everything. And I just checked like for like the last 28 days, I had like over 600 you know views or whatever it was. So
Mm-hmm.
and in over 90 days, numbers are even more. And so YouTube kind of will, it gives you a little bit more accurate numbers, and it also tells you like, like what country people are watching from. So like, of course, my main audience is the United States, and then I got Italy, and then Germany, and then Australia. So those are like my top, those are my top and I'm part Italian, so I'm Irish and Italian. So I don't got anybody from Ireland, but hey, my Italian people, they, you know, my paisans, they show love over in Italy. I don't know where in Italy they're watching just as Italy, but I mean, there's a good amount of views in Italy. So I'm like, holy cow! Like, I didn't realize, like, it's not enough for me to start, going over there, like doing like events or nothing like that. But it's cool that they're, watching the content. So,
Yeah, definitely.
and you've had a chance to interview top people in the cigar industry. You've mentioned a few already, but who were some of your favorite interviews so far?
Oh, like, uh, I mean, as of like tonight, it was like episode 82. So it's like I always have fun for one thing, like interviewing Michael Herklots. I remember I did him in 2020 when the pandemic first started, and it was still when he was with Nat Sherman, and then be able to do him a couple weeks ago, obviously with Ferry Otego, it was like a completely different vibe and show. Um, so he's always one that I like because he's kind of a mentor like figure to me because when we did a cover story on him, I think in 2020 during the pandemic, and just that experience of writing, and he kind of gave good feedback that I usually don't get with cover stories, to the point where I kind of rewrote a lot of the story or recasted it. So he's always one interview I always enjoy. I always enjoy Matt Booth because you never know
What's gonna come out of his mouth?
right. You never know what's going to happen. Um, I've had a lot of women from the industry on the show too, and those are always interesting because you don't hear from them in like a lot of the other media as much. So it's always for me fun to hear a completely different perspective. So I can't pick out, like I said, just like one person that's like, oh, like that was so awesome. Because there's so many interviews, and there are always like moments in each interview that you're just like that's a quotable moment. And I do try to go back and like cut up the episodes, and so there's so many like moments where like quotable moments, or like where they really give good advice, and you're just like, wow, that's that's when I feel like I was like, I've done my job, because we're not just talking about wrapper, binder, filler. It's like, hopefully
Hmm.
when somebody watches this, they're like, that's a cool guy or that's a cool woman. Like, I want to go try that product just because I know a little bit more about them now, which has happened a couple of times. Um, yeah.
Most definitely. Now, have you ever had a live interview that you feel didn't go as well as you hoped? Maybe the person answered questions too quickly, or you weren't as prepared as you thought you were. Like, how did you handle that situation as an interviewer?
Well, it was like a couple of days ago we had an interview, maybe even last week, and the internet connection was not great. But that was nothing. That was like out of my control.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like one of those things where you're like trying to interview, and then like you ask a profound question, and they're like, and then like
And then
right,
they're frozen.
right, and it's just like, oh man, and then you're just like sitting there, you're like, you see people, you see like the few people who are watching live are like starting to like trickle out, and you're like, man, you're just like, okay, hold on a second, I think they're gonna come back, and then they come back, and then it's like out again, and then like
Hmm.
it's funny because like for that particular episode, when I went back and chopped it up, it only accounted for like 2 minutes of the whole hour and 5 minutes or so, and it felt like it was a lot like when you're in the middle of it and you're trying to make things kind of like, continue onward while you wait for the person to sign back on. But it seems like an eternity. So um, luckily I haven't had that many bad issues. Like I said, when I was doing it on Instagram Live, I did have more issues where it's like I was sitting there interviewing them. I could hear them, they could hear me, but apparently nobody else could hear them. So there was like I was sitting there looking at the comments coming in. They're like, I can't hear you all. Like, what's going on? Like, I can't hear. I can't hear. I can't hear. You're just like, crap. And so I was just like, well, I'm just gonna keep on with the interview and this, and then it was that's at that moment though. That was like the last time I did an Instagram live because I was like, I'm not
Yeah,
doing it again. I'm just gonna have to try to invest in something better because I was like, that's just too nerve wracking. Like it's,
yeah.
it's like too much to go through and like I said, people not be able to hear it, and then you have to apologize and then you have to try to redo it somehow, and you're like, I don't want to ask the same questions again, and
Aggravating.
yeah,
Yeah, I've had some crazy, mishaps. Like I had somebody, like if you go back and watch my YouTube, I mean, I can say the name, like it's not like I'm bashing them. It's not their fault or my fault, but Melanie Cisco was coming to my shop to do a our 1 year anniversary party. So we had, and so she was still in the Dominican Republic. This was like a couple days before. So my boss was at the shop. I was at the other end of the shop. It's a 5,000 square foot shop. So he was by in between like our backstock humidor and our flavored cigar humidor, and I was like in the main lounge part, on the high table, and then she was in the Dominican, and her internet was not the greatest. Like we could hear her, but she was like a robot almost.
yeah,
And plus she had control of the StreamYard because she's got more followers than me. So we knew we were trying to get the word out. She was helping to promote it and everything. So like that was kind of nerve wracking. But I've had in the very beginning days I've had some nerve wracking times of that. But that's all kind of like out of my control. And even sometimes there's been interviews that I've had that I felt like it wasn't going to turn out that great because maybe like in the beginning I was like, oh my, he's like answering like the first couple questions. We have to backtrack, but everything turned out good. You just have to sometimes ask stuff a different way, in order to get the response, and just kind of like don't be afraid to backtrack a little bit because sometimes people they'll just talk and talk and talk, and it's like you've already answered like a bunch of like what are we going to talk about after we run out of stuff to talk about? But
yeah. Sometimes I found like it's the most challenging part is like focusing on what they're saying, especially if it's a long answer, and then you get to the end and you're like, okay, what do I what do I ask now or something? Like it's almost like you have to. I found myself like listening, and then like midway through they'll say something, and I'm like, ooh, they'll make a good follow up question. So it's like kind of keeping up the pace so that when they're done, and you never know when they're going to be done. Like you said, some people are give you long answers. Other people will just abruptly just be like, yeah, and you're like, oh, that's it.
yeah, now do you prepare in advance? Like, do you have like a set of stuff you're gonna ask, and then still go with the flow? Because I kind of do a little bit of both. I might not ask something because of the way the conversation's going, but I got notes.
I will, I will. Lately, what I've done is I'll try to watch an interview that they've done with somebody else. Even though I hate doing that because I don't ever want to ask the same questions that they've already been asked 10,000 times in other interviews.
Yeah, that's why you got to do that.
Yeah, so I try to watch something that they've done recently just so I can get an idea of what they kind of like to ask, and then I'll like try to tee off from there. Um, but I don't do pre-prepared questions at all. I usually don't have any notes. Every now and then I'll have like a little post-it note with like 4 little points. But those 4 points have to get me through for deep cuts like an hour. So, you could easily run through 4 points in like 15 minutes if you don't pace yourself.
Yeah,
Me, it's always I have backup questions. Like towards the like 50 minutes in, I usually start asking like general questions like, um, you know, do you know your why? Because I read this book and it's all about finding your why or defining why you do stuff. And that's all I ask that. That usually takes up 5 minutes. How does and then I ask questions, kind of Oprah questions. I found myself because I watch her interviews. So I was always like have like a list on my phone of like Oprah questions that she's asked people, and I try to pull from that. So I'm like, like what have you learned about yourself through this experience? And they go, oh my gosh, and that usually is like another 5 minutes. What kind of advice do you have to give to somebody who's like, in your position or whatever. That's another 5 minutes. So that's like takes care of like 15 minutes worth of show for me. And then, like I said, it's just being aware of who they are and having some pre-prepared questions that kind of go even outside of the cigar stuff. Because the cigar stuff, honestly, sometimes it doesn't take up much much time at all. Like
yeah,
they'll be like, yeah, we just released this new cigars, something like this. yeah, it's gonna be releasing next month, and that'll be it. And you'll be like, oh, okay, like this is not enough to carry on like an entire show. If
Yeah.
like an hour format, which is like what you and I like to
Yeah.
do. So
Yeah, I try to keep it at about an hour, sometimes a little bit more. It just depends on how the conversation goes
yeah.
and the flow of things and all that. But yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. Like, when if I talk to a brand owner, just we talk cigars and all that, but like I try to find out other things, that may not be cigar related, because it's like sitting in a cigar shop. You're just getting to know somebody. Like, it's just free conversation.
hmm
Now, if you could interview one person who you have not had the chance to interview yet in the cigar industry, who would it be?
It would probably be somebody from La Florida Dominicana. I haven't interviewed any of those Tony or Lido or Inez or anybody there yet. They're kind of my Moby Dick. I'm chasing them down. I'm determined at some point I'm gonna break through. But I think it'll be them. And I would like to go back and interview Jonathan Drew again because he was my first ever live interview back in 2015 during IPCPR in New Orleans. He was the first time I ever interviewed somebody like sitting face to face, and it was the first time I had ever gone to IPCPR. Every time, first time for like a lot of stuff. And I just remember it was like somebody said like, "Oh, we set up this interview. It's gonna be with Jonathan Drew. Like he runs Drew Estate." And I was like, "Okay." And then it was like, "Yeah, he's a big deal." I was like, "Yeah, I know." And it was like, "Are you ready?" I was like, I guess so." And it was like, he comes in a little golf cart because it was like one of the year like the show floor was like massive, and it was like you had to take a golf cart everywhere. And he comes in this golf cart. He pops out. He has like two arms full of like cigar boxes, and he sits down. And he's like, okay, like, yeah, let's do this. And it was like asking him questions. And I just remember him saying, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to answer this question. And I was like, oh, okay. And then it was like, ask him another question. Yeah, I don't like that question. I'm going to answer this question instead. I was like, oh, okay. And then it was like, I thought it was like a really bad interview. But then like every time I saw him afterwards, he uses that as like oh, do you remember when you interviewed me at IPSPR? I was like, yeah, I can't forget that. He's like, oh, it was so funny. Like, look how far you've come. Yeah, I know. So I feel like even though I interview him sort of like I would like to interview him with like 6 or so more years of experience now of interviewing people because I feel like it'll be a much better interview. So I put it out there a couple weeks ago that when Deep Cuts makes it to like episode 100, which will at this rate will be sometime this year, doing 2 episodes a week for most weeks. I was like, I really want to try to do like get somebody like Jonathan Drew or even Carlito Fuente because I haven't interviewed him directly either. Like I interviewed him like sending questions to Fuente to answer for the magazine and got responses back, but I haven't sat down and like being able to chat with him personally. I just met him at FE one year when he was there to pick up an award, and it was like meeting the Pope. He comes by and he's just like, you're like, oh, Carlito, congratulations. He's like, yes. And he like touches you like lightly. I was like, like that was like the experience. And then he like, goes off into the crowd and everybody's like trying to touch him and stuff. So I feel like that would be a really good interview. So look, there's lots of like big people that I'm like, okay, we're getting to the point now after 82 interviews. Like I'm either ready or I need to interview them because I don't want to, just repeat the same people over and over again, even though there's follow-up conversations, obviously, from anybody who I interviewed in 2020 over Instagram Live.
Yeah.
Time for us to do another interview. It's time for most of us to do another interview because there's a lot that's happened since then. So,
Oh yeah, most definitely.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure you saw my Facebook cover photo, and it's a picture with me and Carlito Fuente and Joey Bianco, and I was shirtless. That's the most epic picture that I've ever taken. And that was my very first official time, like meeting Carlito in person. Like I've been on virtual herfs with him and everything, and even after the Great Smoke 2021, when they did the virtual experience, like I was supposed to meet him then, but because he was in town and everything, but he wasn't able to make it. So the next day he calls me on Facebook Messenger. He's like, brother, I'm sorry I couldn't make it. I wasn't feeling well after the broadcast, so I just went ahead and left. And he sent an angel share for me through Melanie Cisco, and it's like that was wild. I was like, Carlito Fuente called me. I tell this story all the time because it's like it's one of those moments of me being a public personality in the cigar world. Like Carlito Fuente follows what I do, and it's a true honor. You know what I'm saying? Like, because he's that regular guy. He's very well known, but he's very humble. And the fact that he was sitting there, I was shirtless taking a picture with him. It's just like, who does that?
Yeah, and on that note, going back to one of your other questions, like, one of the best interviews I think I did was Nick and Janine Perdomo during the pandemic. Like, they were at their store, and it was a nice conversation. And every now and then, like when I saw Nick at TPE a couple weeks, like back in January, like he was saying like, oh, Janine like loves your work, and she's a big fan of yours. And I was like, she's a fan of like me, like like I'm sitting there like, me, like you just never think about stuff like that, like somebody of such big stature and presence in the industry. So those kind of things like make me definitely laugh and go like, wow, that's kind of cool. You can make those connections like you did with Carlito.
Yeah. I mean, when I was at the Great Smoke, I had my birthday bash that Wednesday, and I brought people out on a Wednesday, which is like, it wasn't wall to wall, but there was enough of a crowd there where it was like a successful event. And so Carlito wasn't able to make it, but I was walking past him. There was a line of people waiting to talk to him, and he was like, "Hey, Mike, happy birthday, bro!" And then like he gets done taking a picture, and then I get to talk to him. Mind you, there's a line of people, and I didn't even have to wait in line. So like it was, I mean, it's humbling, man. Like I'm a white dude that's from both the hood and the suburbs. Like I come from the bottom, like literally. So like I'm literally building everything from the bottom, heading to the top. And just to see those people that you smoke their cigar, or they're internet, not just nationally known, internationally known, and they know
Yeah.
who you are. Like, I mean, nothing compares.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I got a little bit of a nugget as I was finishing up, my show prep for the show, and watching your show simultaneously. So, um, you and Ben Wills, you were talking about, discussing black-owned cigar brands and not getting the type of exposure as other brands because they aren't as prevalent in the spotlight of the cigar media. So, why do you think that is? And first of all, and then I'll follow it up with another question.
Well, I just think it's it's hard to say why it is. I think it's just because they don't get the same opportunities or coverage. Some of the black-owned brands, they're, I guess, what you would consider boutique. And as a retailer, sometimes retailers don't always want to take a gamble on boutique because they need product that's going to like move. Like when they're paying for product to bring into the store, they need that product to like return a profit to them, and they need it to like move. And they don't always know if like some of these brands, whether they're black owned or women owned or minority owned, are going to move.
Or anybody owned, period.
Right. If they're going to move compared to somebody who has a little bit more marketing or push behind it. So it's a weird situation, and it's just sometimes you just have to, as me and Ben were talking about earlier today. It's like when you start talking to them and you start treating them, positioning them as a brand like any other brand, then you start to hear their story, and you start to see that they're just as serious about it as anybody else.
Yeah.
And that separates them from another company is just that they haven't had that same exposure. It's hard for them to, there's, I won't say the name of the magazine, but we all know that there's a main magazine in the cigar world, and if you don't get covered in that and don't make it into their top 25 cigars of the year, then it's like, who are you? To a certain degree, that's the mentality. And then there's a blog out there, and if they don't cover you, then again, it's just like, oh, who are you? So people look for those things as validation. And if you don't get those validating points, then it's like you have, as a brand, I mean, you have a very steep uphill battle to try to get the same kind of coverage, the same kind of attention. And it's just a lot to ask. So I don't think it's a quality issue as it is just, you know, a money issue sometimes. Like they don't have the money for the same type of marketing and branding and PR push that some of the other companies do.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, let's see here how I have this question word. I might change it, but uh, so how can the media better elevate and spotlight, our black brothers and sisters of the leaf who make cigars? Like, obviously there's a title issue, whatever they're calling, black. But that's a whole other thing. But I mean, just as a brand in general, like you think, the media should just like look for those gems of companies
Well,
and and spotlight them more, or is it about like more of the hustle, the grind of, what are you doing to get yourself seen to even be put in that spotlight?
well, on the media side, I mean, I think as a media, you should go out and do your own searching for stories and brands to cover. But I don't think that's what happens. I think
Yeah,
a lot of the media expects the brands to come to them, and then they like to kind of pick and choose. Like I've heard, some of the brands say, "Oh, I pitch a cover story, or not a cover story, just coverage magazine," but they told me that I need to be a little bit more established, and it's like, who are you to say that they need to be more established? Maybe it's not fit for your focus. Like there's just some media platforms or magazines or blogs that kind of focus on a certain aspect of the industry, um, and that's a completely different thing. But as for what we can do, is I think the media has to position them not as being different, but being the same. So
yeah,
if you have a brand, just because it's black owned, it shouldn't be spoken of any differently than any other brand. I think
yeah,
if you tell their story in the same way, if you did in the same kind of coverage, the same kind of consideration, if you're the type who does like cigar ratings and stuff like that, if you do that in the same way, than you do everybody else, then it at least gets their name in the pool of everybody else. It's like, wow, like this is cool. But I don't see
yeah,
it happening all the time. Like some of the some of the brands that Ben brought to the forefront with her activation with small batch, I had never heard of before. And I was like,
yeah,
and I was, it just takes a lot of time to like research and find these people. And I don't know if all the media has the time, because most of the media that I know, um, media isn't their full time job. Like it's something that
yeah.
they're doing in their off hours. So they're not spending 9 hours, a day.
Except for Coop, because he does his full time job plus,
Right.
dedicating his everything that he does like a full time job. So it's like working double shifts every day.
Yeah. But not everybody's like that. So,
Yeah,
like I said, they're expecting brands to kind of come to them. And then some of them are, like I said, some of them are not about editorial or telling stories or doing interviews like you do. Some of them
yeah.
are about press releases or getting product to do ratings, and some of these brands can't afford to just send out new product, willy nilly. So what
Oh,
happens?
absolutely.
So it's just a situation that, like I said, I think the best solution is just to seek out those brands that are different, that you haven't covered before, and then position them, in the same way as you would any other brand.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I feel the same way. Like I've always been like the token white dude in the black community, but so I understand like,
Mhm.
titling, something like black owned because it's important because of, the history in this country of, and just, the of how do I want to word this? Just the history and, coming from where things were to where they are now, and black people taking more advantage of the opportunity and everything. And so like I get it. And I also on the same aspect, because obviously I can't, no matter how down I am, I can't, still am not going to be able to identify, because with that experience, so you kind of have to have a balanced view on that issue there.
Right.
And me personally, I try to cover, I would, because I obviously don't do like, I don't have a full like website. I don't do like press releases. I don't do reviews and all that type of stuff. I literally just have my show. I get people's story out there, give them a chance to tell their story, promote what they got to promote. And it's I try to cover the most women out there. I try to look at brands that, that other media outlets are not like looking at. Like next week I don't know if you've ever heard of Nomos Cigars out of New York. They're pretty new, and I smoked their cigar like a couple months ago, and they sent me a $50, well, I shouldn't even say the amount, but they sent me a check for posting, the cigar on Instagram, and then I reached out to them recently because I wanted to help them out, and because they're willing to invest in themselves, so I want to be, and they showed a lot of love to me, and they believe in what I do, so I do the same because the cigar was really good, and so I'm gonna have them on the show next week, and get their story out there because I haven't seen anybody else talking about Nomos cigars, and they make a really good cigar. It's made at the La Aurora factory, and um, they're small guys, but I think with the right people behind them, and I think they have that opportunity to grow because they make a good product.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, this has been a good show, man. I appreciate you for coming on the show tonight. And it's you pretty much did it back to back. Did your show, and then
You
you had to be in the hot seat.
sick of me after today. I was like, because we're gonna like do an hour deep cuts, and then I get in our shirtless Mike's show, and we're gonna be doing a whole nother hour. So I was like, I told people this morning, you could be sick of me by the end of today, but it was all good. We had
Oh yeah,
fun.
most definitely. And everybody out there that tuned in tonight, and everybody that's gonna tune in after the fact, I appreciate you guys for tuning in every week. So make sure you hit that subscribe button if you've never watched the show, if it's your first time. If you're experiencing the show after the fact, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button and all that good stuff. And I'll let you know when we're not live so we can talk that real shit.